As I get older, it gets harder and harder to find satisfaction in the same things I once enjoyed. It requires reflection to learn what leads to this enjoyment, find new things that bring out the same fun I once had. In this reflection, I realize I've always loved RPGs, but I never acknowledge the genre when I think of my favorites. I always think of action, adventure, even puzzle games before I acknowledge the joys RPGs bring me. I think a lot of people can relate to this being as, unless you are a hardcore RPG fan, most people play an RPG game to completion, put it down, and go back to the same game they've been playing for days, weeks, months, even years. Heck, even I do this with League of Legends. I think what a lot of us take for granted is RPGs add to our lives, and the feelings they give us consistently, other genres rarely do. That is what I would like to identify and appreciate in this video. What makes a great RPG? It's important I define what an RPG is, since it has become hard to identify the difference between an RPG and a game with RPG elements. I actually have revised the script to include this section because while looking for footage, I realized how important this is. I define an RPG as a game that allows you to make choices that impact the story. This is what separates South Park: The Stick of Truth from Castle Crashers, Skyrim from Chivalry, and Mass Effect from Star Wars Battlefront. Each of these pairs have similar elements, whether it be setting, combat system, or overall tone. What makes the former of each pair different, and most importantly an RPG, is that they all allow you to use your role to make decisions that will impact the story of the game. RPGs exist strictly to immerse you into a world or society that is unlike your own. They give us the opportunity to be involved in and to craft our own story. RPGs are the closest we can get to becoming the protagonist in a good book or movie. Action games challenge us mechanically. Adventure games are stories laid before us. But RPGs are stories we get to affect and is why they are their own genre entirely. RPGs don't need turn-based combat, a skill tree, classes, or anything like that. These all can exist in other genres and should not be the focus of an RPG. RPGs should focus on immersing the player within it and making them feel like their role matters. How can you play a role if you can't believe what is going on around it? All the parts of any role-playing game should come together to make the player feel like there are real stakes at play. I believe that there are 3 keys to creating this immersion for the player in an RPG, in ascending order of importance. These are the history, the landscape, and the characters. I put history as the least important of the keys, not because it is unnecessary, but because it is often overlooked by the player. The history of the world is important to give context on how things grew to become what it is now. This is often given as exposition at the beginning before we take control of our character, which is why we often overlook and forget about it. But it does set the tone for the role we are playing in the story. When we start a game and we are told about the long lineage of kings that ruled over the land and the adversities they faced to create what it is today, this makes us believe in what we are seeing and makes it feel like a real place. Now, when we are told that we play as the young prince of this land, and we see that he is full of pride, we understand this pride comes from his heritage, rather than them just being an arrogant and spoiled brat. When other characters perceive them as this, we can empathize with our player character, because we understand their heritage and how it must make them feel. This is an experience we would miss if there wasn't a history to immerse us. It is really hard to be immersed into a world that doesn't feel real. Not to say everything in the world of RPGs has to be realistic, actually far from it. Games like Kingdom Hearts and the Mario and Luigi games take place in worlds nothing like our own. However, these places make sense within the context of their own games. They make us believe that there is a connection between the worlds of Disney movies that you can travel between, or the Mushroom Kingdom really exists, resided by mushroom people called toads. This is because while the world may be ridiculous, they maintain this level of ridiculousness the entire time and take it seriously within the world they live in. When you constantly take jabs at how your world doesn't make sense, it doesn't make it self-aware, it makes it less immersive. On the more realistic side of the spectrum, we have games like Fallout and Skyrim. Fallout has a believable landscape that is informed by its history. In a world where nuclear warfare breaks out, the mutated people and animals along with ruined cities and barren wastes makes sense. Skyrim, on the other hand, presents us with a fantasy world where we can believe that scientific advances were halted due to magic being introduced to our world, and acts of gods being known and worshipped. These landscapes help sell us to the premise of the game we are playing. If the world doesn't match the history and characters, it feels phony, and we as players pick up on it. Characters in an RPG shouldn't be just characters to you. Not all have to mean something or be important to you, but they must feel like they are real. When you reach a level of immersion where they aren't just characters in a game to you anymore, there's nothing quite like it. An anecdotal example of this comes from when I was playing Persona 4 Golden. If you've never played a Persona game, you should because they are phenomenal, but they have confidants that you level up by spending time with the characters in the game. They're basically how the game measures the strength of your relationships and grants you bonuses based on how high a level it is. So I was spending time with Chie, who is a member of your party in the game, and I had reached the point where I could decide if I wanted to romance her or not. I suffered great internal strife at this point. I didn't want to romance her because there were other characters I felt suited my protagonist better romantically, but I was also afraid of hurting Chie's feelings. I stopped playing the game for days, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I had to mull over my options and prepare myself to let Chie down. This video game had just made me spend days of my life legitimately distraught because I didn't want to hurt the feelings of someone who isn't real. That is what I'm getting at. All good RPGs make you feel like the characters are real people, and not just video game characters. This is not to be understated, and I am sure we have all played an RPG with characters we didn't care about. And I'm also sure we all soon stop playing those same games because the characters are so important to keep us playing. The most important part of any RPG is the choices they allow the players to make. An adventure game can provide the 3 previous keys and still not be an RPG because letting you experience a story is one thing, but allowing you the ability to create the story is another. This is the freedom that fully immerses you in said role, and only RPGs can provide. This doesn't mean that the game needs 70 endings and every choice you make is like a butterfly effect that leads to a totally different outcome. This is an unreasonable scope for a video game and is much better for things like visual novels or tabletop RPGs. What a video game RPG has to provide, though, are meaningful choices. Whether this be choosing who you do and don't want to help, or how you choose to solve a problem, choices are what a great RPG uses to immerse you. Great RPGs use these choices to allow you to think not from your own perspective in your life, but from the perspective of your character and their life. Just like how a good book or movie can make you think about your life in a new light or question things you once accepted, a good RPG presents you with choices that not only induce this same feeling, but takes it a step further and makes you do something about it. This interactivity is what truly immerses us in these games. To use Skyrim as an example again, it has you make a lot of choices, whether it be what skill to upgrade, what weapon to use, which quest to complete, etc. I want to use a very specific example of a choice that I have come to appreciate and believe is one of the best examples of meaningful choices in the game. When you aid Aventus Artino in murdering the director of his orphanage, Greld the Kind, he tells you how you must be an assassin from the Dark Brotherhood answering his summons. When you are new to the game, you have no idea what he means by this, and just continue on until you receive a letter from the courier with a hand and the words, "We know." You don't know who sent this, but the next time you sleep in a bed, you'll be kidnapped by Astrid, the leader of the Dark Brotherhood, and awaken in an abandoned shack. Here she will present you with my favorite choice of the game. She has restrained 3 people and tells you that one of them has a contract out for their death. You must decide and kill one of them. You can talk to them and decide who you think someone would want dead or who should die, kill them, and then report back to Astrid. She makes a remark on who you chose, but if you ask her who was the correct choice, she flips the tables on you. In this scenario, the choice didn't matter. What mattered is that when told to kill, you would do it regardless of if you had all the information to make an informed decision. This alone is great as it reveals something about the character you are playing, but the best part is that there is a choice. See, if you follow what you think the game is telling you to do, you can progress through the Dark Brotherhood working as an assassin and experience their questline. Or you can choose to kill Astrid if you don't agree with the Dark Brotherhood and would rather eradicate them. You can then release the captives and report the death of Astrid to a guard and begin a new questline destroying the Brotherhood. This is a meaningful choice that gives agency to the player and dramatically impacts the story for the player on that character. Choices like these are what make us continue to enjoy RPGs. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I'm working on my next video on what breaks an RPG, where in this video I spoke on what makes a good RPG. That video will be on what is hurting RPGs and what we must do to improve them. I'd like to acknowledge the community of game analyzers and critics on the platform that inspired me to make this content. That being Adam Millard, the architect of games, Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit, and the Extra Credits channel, along with many more niche creators. This is to acknowledge that I currently don't really know my identity and am working on building it. So if you see any similarity, credit is given where credit is due. Once again, thank you, and I hope to see you next time.